What is your name? How old are you?
My name is Margaret Ellen Wolf, and I'm 46.
And my name is Thomas Park McElwain Wolf, and I am 47.
Are you originally from Ashland?
I'm not originally from Ashland. I'm from Stanberry, Missouri.
And I'm from Arlington, Virginia.
Why did you come to Ashland?
We came to Ashland because Tom was transferred here by Circuit City. He worked for them at the time. And his uncle was a professor at Randolph-Macon. So when he learned that we were being transferred to Richmond, he said, well, there's only one place you can live in Virginia, and that's Ashland. So we came here. We liked it.
Yeah, there were only 2 houses on the market at the time. And we picked this one because it looked Victorian. And I don't know, it had a charm that none of the other houses that we had looked at had.
What are your current occupations?
I stay at home and volunteer.
She's a community activist. And I run store operations and training for CarMax.
Do you remember your first jobs?
I do. I remember my first job. It was detasseling corn for the big seed corn companies in Missouri. They would pick us up on a bus and then transport us to the field, where we would get on a wagon. We would ride to the field, and 3:30 in the morning we would be pulling tassels off of the corn so it would not cross-pollinate, and the corn would be, good seed corn. But it was a hot, horrible job.
My first job was delivering newspapers, and at that time you had to go collect payment yourself. And so you could go knock on people's doors and say, you have to pay your monthly newspaper subscription. And for some reason, a lot of people on my newspaper route decided they didn't want to answer the door. And so I ended up making very little money, maybe clearing $10 a week for delivering newspapers.
What are some of the other jobs you've had?
I have worked as a bookkeeper for a farm and home store, picked up rocks. I worked as a producer for a NPR affiliate in Columbia, Missouri. I worked as a producer for a television station. Then I've been volunteering since.
Yeah, we worked together in the television business. We both got degrees from the University of Missouri in broadcast journalism. We moved to Charleston, South Carolina, got jobs at the same TV station. We were engaged at the time, and she was the producer of the main 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock newscasts, and I was a reporter who worked mostly weekends by myself, doing a one-man band, going out and shooting and then coming back and writing and editing and voicing packages and getting something on the air by 6 o'clock.
We both worked for Circuit City, though. That was actually my last job.
Yeah, we got tired of the television news business, or at least I did, because it's just a lot of work, a lot of deadline pressure for not very much money, and we moved to Atlanta unemployed, stayed with my sister for a couple of weeks, and we went to a job fair for Circuit City, which was opening their, 30th and 31st stores, and we were both picked out of the crowd, and we were the first married couple hired as a married couple by Circuit City.
What elementary, middle, and high schools did you attend?
I attended Stanberry R2 Elementary, R2 Junior High, and R2 High School.
And in Arlington, I attended Maury Elementary. I did a little stint at Patrick Henry Elementary. Then I went on to Thomas Jefferson Junior High School and Washington Lee High School.
What did you like or dislike about school?
I liked all of the sporting events. I did not like math.
Yeah, you played
Basketball and softball and anything else that you could play.
Yeah, they basically had to play everything, because if they were competing against another school, they were, how many in your graduating class?
I had 36 in my graduating class.
Yeah, so they kind of were obligated to play on every sports team. My high school was huge. It was 1,600 in my graduating class, and I was very much involved in theater, so that's kind of what I liked the best.
How were your parents involved in your schooling?
My parents attended all of the sporting events, all of the PTA meetings. They attended any school carnival, anything that happened at the school my parents were at.
And my parents did the usual mom and dad thing, make sure I did my homework, and they were involved in some PTA activities, but there were 4 of us, and we were all in different schools, unlike Ellen's family, because they all went to the same school in Stanberry. We were all at different schools at different times, and it was hard for them to stay involved in each one. But they made sure I got my homework done for the most part. It came to my performances when I was acting.
What do you remember about your childhood?
Well, I remember a lot of things about my childhood, but I guess one of my first memories is we lived in an old farmhouse that had an outhouse, and we lived there until I was 5. And I was very afraid to go to the outhouse because every year wasps would build nests in the outhouse, and I was very afraid that I would get stung, which I did get stung once.
How about your cats?
I had a lot of cats.
Okay. Enough about that. What do I remember from my childhood? Gosh, we took a trip, my family. We had a pretty middle class kind of upbringing. And when I was 13, we took a trip across the United States. My dad took off from his job for like 3 weeks, and we all piled into a VW bus, a microbus. It was kind of the predecessor to the minivan. And we drove all the way across the country and back. And I think that we didn't really want to talk to each other for the next couple of years after that. But it was quite an adventure.
What was the greatest joy or sadness of your childhood?
My greatest joy is when I won the district state spelling bee. My greatest sadness was when my grandparents passed away.
My greatest joy was acting, I think. I wrote and directed a play when I was 14 and got to perform it for the whole school. I remember when I was 10 years old, it was on my birthday. My parents had bought me a bicycle, and some older kid came up and grabbed it out of my hands, and I never saw that bicycle again. So that was kind of a sad moment, because I didn't get another bicycle till a couple of years later.
Who were your childhood role models?
Oh, golly. Let's see. Well, my childhood role models were anybody I knew who graduated from college, because I really, really, really wanted to go to college, and not a lot of people went to college where I was from. So I had a friend. She was actually older than me. Her name was Tammy Jennings. She went to college, and she became a theater major and ended up singing on Carnival cruise ships, which we thought was so cool when I was in high school.
And my hero was John Lennon. I was a huge Beatles fan. I still am. And yeah, when he was shot in 1980, that was among the saddest moments of my life.
What were the things you enjoyed doing as a child?
I enjoyed, we did all sorts of outdoor stuff because we only got one station on TV, so there was very little inside activities for us. I had horses, so I rode horses. I had tons of pets. We were always nursing small, pigs and calves back to health because their mothers had deserted them. I had 2 pet raccoons and squirrel and a rabbit and a lot of cats, as you mentioned. I had 50 cats, and one day, probably 40 of them were missing, and I'm pretty sure my dad had something to do with that.
Yeah, I was in Boy Scouts, so we did a lot of camping and hiking and setting campfires, and I set a few of those around the house and didn't burn anything down, but I got into a lot of trouble for things like that. So.
How were you expected to behave in front of your parents?
My parents demanded very good behavior all the time. They had some pretty strict rules. So we were always on our best behavior around adults. Although, unlike here in Virginia, we did not have to call people sir or ma'am. We called them Mr. or Mrs. and their last names.
Yeah, and my parents were pretty big on the manners, so it was yes sir, no sir, please sir, ma'am. And my mother was a home economics teacher, and so she knew all that stuff. She knew how you were supposed to behave, and she had a big wooden spoon that we would experience at times when we didn't behave.
How were decisions made in your families?
They were made together, but my dad was the ultimate decision maker. So everybody could have some input, but when it really came down to it, it was him. Like, I couldn't get my ears pierced until I was 18 because he didn't want me to. I couldn't date until I was 16 because he didn't want me to. So we had some pretty strict rules.
Yeah, my mom was the primary driver of discipline in my house. And when we were little kids, she would sometimes say, wait till your father gets home. And when we got home, he would take us into the bedroom, close the door, and then he would make sounds like he was spanking us when he really wasn't. And we would just scream and pretend that he was, and then we'd all laugh. And I don't think my mother quite knew that we were laughing when we closed the door. So,
What do you remember about your grandparents?
I remember a lot about my grandparents because I spent a lot of time there. They lived on a farm on a hill, so we had a great view. There was a big pond with a windmill down from their house, and in the evenings we got to take our BB guns and shoot frogs in the pond, and then we would, my grandfather would dress them, and then Grandma would cook them in the skillet. And I don't know if you've ever seen a frog leg being cooked, but it jumps around like it's alive. So we would all gather around, we'd look at the skillet, the frog legs would be jumping, Grandma would be, trying to scare us with it, and then we'd sit down, we'd feast on frog legs. They taste like chicken.
yeah. My grandfather was superintendent of Prince Edward County Public Schools during the Brown versus the Board of Education deal in front of the Supreme Court. And he presided over the school district when they closed the schools because they didn't want to integrate. So he has kind of an infamous reputation, but he was a very kind man. He was a little guy because he grew up in Japan. His parents were missionaries, and so he spent most of his childhood in Japan, and I guess they just don't have a diet that allows people to reach their full potential. His brothers were all very tall, though. And then I had another grandfather who had a home in New Jersey, and he had a beach house on Long Beach Island, New Jersey, and we used to go up there every summer and go fishing and crabbing and catch eels, and he would smoke them in his smokehouse, and you'd have smoked eels.
Did your families attend church?
My families yes, they attended church regularly. We're Southern Baptist, and we went to church on Sunday mornings for a very long time, usually until about 1 or 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Then we would go to my grandparents and have fried chicken. Then we would come back to church at 6:30, and by 9 o'clock we usually were coming home. Then we went back to church on Wednesday. We had revivals several times a year that would be every night church for 7 days. So we attended a lot of church.
I didn't attend quite that much, but only because we only had to go on Sunday, and then there might be a youth group activity. I grew up going to Arlington Presbyterian Church.
What was your church's and minister's role in civic affairs in the community?
Because we were such a small town, our minister was very involved. I mean, he not only, on the spiritual side advised people, but he was, usually the mayor. He was also a community leader.
Right, and in my church, the minister was very much involved in community outreach programs, but wasn't necessarily in the political arena. But just did really good things. Had a clothing bank at the church that needy folks could go to every Wednesday and pick out all the clothes they needed and keep themselves and their kids warm.
What was your childhood neighborhood like?
I grew up on a farm, so we were far away from people. My closest neighbor was a half mile, and they ran a small grocery store. So my friend Lyndon, he was their son. We would get off the bus. He would go into the grocery store and grab 2 cans of Vienna sausages and some crackers, saltines. Then we would go sit in the cornfield and eat them. That was our after-school snack.
Yeah, I had a rather conventional childhood in a middle-class suburb in Arlington, Virginia. The cool thing is that we lived right across the river from Washington, D.C., and there were so many events going on in the 60s that I knew about and were significant events. In 1963, Martin Luther King spoke at the Lincoln Memorial, which was only about 3 miles away from my house. I remember when he was assassinated in 1968 because you could see the smoke as the city of D.C. burned. But there was also just a great cultural advantage. The museums, all the Smithsonian museums are free, and so we'd just go to the museums. After school, I would go over to the Library of Congress and study, or sit in on a congressional hearing. It was just a great place to grow up.
What were the gathering places in your neighborhood?
Our main gathering places were any school event and any church event. We also had a downtown park area, a square, and we would have twice a year. They would have they would have a 4th of July carnival, and then they would have a Christmas parade every year.
Yeah, just same kinds of things.
Do you and your family participate in any of neighborhood activities in Ashland?
We do. We participate in a lot. Our children, of course, attended all the schools here, so they did all of the school events. And then we've always been involved with the Ashland Variety Show since 1995. Mm-hmm. I'm a Hanover Master Gardener. I'm involved with the Ashland Junior Women's Club. We served on the board. I was president for 2 years of the Hanover Arts and Activities Center.
Yeah, we served on the board for 6 years, and did a lot to improve the building and improve the quality of our fundraising events. So we did 4 of them, as I recall. We had the Ashland Railroad Run. We had the 4th of July Parade. We had the Variety Show, which was a big one. That brought in enough income to keep the center running for 2 years. And then we also had the Christmas tour. And those were the big events, and Alan did a great job in promoting those events. So the Hanover Arts and Activity Center is pretty solvent right now, and it looks great. I was also on the Ashland Parks and Recreation Committee for several years, and we had to stay involved in the community because we had kids that participated in school events and lots of sporting events.
Lots of PTA stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any carnivals in Ashland?
There right now is the Strawberry Fair. It's a big fair with lots of vendors and crafts and food, and of course strawberries. Live bands. They usually have 3 stages. Our son actually performed last year.
Yeah.
Then they have the 4th of July parade, which is non-motorized. You walk, and we have somebody dress up like Uncle Sam and give a speech.
And they have the Lawn Chair Brigade and what was the Croquet Brigade.
I led the croquet brigade, 1 year. That was
Lots
fun.
of dogs dressed up in silly costumes. It's kind of a nutty, casual event. There's also the annual Christmas parade, which goes right down England Street. That's the last Sunday before Thanksgiving, and everybody either is in the parade or they come out to watch it. So it kind of brings the whole town out.
How has Ashland changed since you've been here?
Since we've been here, the biggest change we see is development. When we moved here, there was very few stores at the intersection of 95 and Highway 54, and of course that's all developed now. And all along the 95 Route 1 corridor, we've just seen tremendous development. It was all farmland with cattle grazing on it.
Yeah, they were just beginning to build the Virginia Center Commons Mall, but across the street where the Target is now, there's absolutely nothing. So the biggest change is this development kind of moving northward from 295 on Route 1.
What were your reactions to the newer businesses such as Walmart?
Yeah, we kind of came down on the anti-Walmart side, only because we had done a little research and seen what had happened to communities like Tappahannock, Virginia, who put a lot of local folks out of business when they established a Walmart there. We didn't want the same thing to happen to Ashland, and it hasn't happened to the extent that we were concerned about, but still, I have a feeling that Rose's won't be around for too much longer, or the Ace hardware store. And you hate to see profits that were originally coming back into the community going to Bentonville, Arkansas, which is where Walmart's headquarters is. And it was a very contentious issue for Ashlanders. It was a 2-year battle. They came and made a documentary, a PBS documentary about, I think they called them
Store Wars.
Store Wars, right, and featured a lot of the local politicians here. But all kinds of splinter groups sprung out. The Flamingos, I think, are still loosely organized, but they're kind of an anti-development group. It's not that we're anti-development, it's just that we're pro-Ashland, and we think that our money should go back into Ashland and not out of state.
In what ways did having a college in the town affect your life?
Having the college has really helped as far as cultural events go. We've seen some incredible shows there. Lots of theater things. We saw a tremendous illusionist. I said yes, and the Richmond Symphony. They've brought a lot of culture to Ashland.
And they actually brought us to Ashland because my uncle taught at Randolph-Macon for 40 years. Since 1955 is when he first came to Ashland. And if he wasn't working at Randolph-Macon, we wouldn't be living in Ashland.
True.
Have you adjusted to the noise of the train?
I grew up next to a train in Missouri, so it was no problem for me. However, Tom has some issues with an engineer at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Or I did. Now it's train, what train, which is pretty much the standard response for folks who have lived here for a long time. And we don't notice it as much, but yeah, it was hard to get used to. There was this engineer who just didn't want anybody to be asleep at 4:30 in the morning, so he would lean really hard on the whistle. And we live at the south end of the railroad tracks where they can actually blow the whistle. They don't blow it up, by Randolph-Macon. You're lucky in that regard.
Have any of your family members or friends worked on the railroad? And if so, what were their specific jobs?
My brother currently works for the railroad. He works for CSX, and his job is to lay new track, repair old track. He's always called in if there's a derailment. So he does quite a lot with the railroad, actually.
And that's out of Atlanta. Mm-hmm. So, and I know her brother, so that's who I know that works for the railroad.
Can you tell me anything about the trolley service in Ashland?
I don't remember the trolley because it's not been in existence since we've been here, but they have made a walking path out of the trolley line, so I've walked the path many times. It's very scenic, and I do know that it was used to transport people from Richmond up to Ashland for the day, like a day trip.
Yeah, it's kind of a resort trolley. And Ashland, I'm sure you got the story from somebody else, but it started out as a resort for RF&P, Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad.
Who are some of Ashland's most colorful characters?
Ashland has many colorful characters. Sue Watson, the president of the school board, and community volunteer extraordinaire comes to mind. She dragged us into the variety show. She was Uncle Bill's friend.
We weren't kicking and screaming too hard, though, because we had seen the variety show.
She gets her way, though, that's Sue
does.
Watson.
She is very persuasive. And so we had seen the variety show the first night that we had moved here, and it was just a really, really cool thing. We were impressed by just the community spirit that was shown through that. And so every time it's been held in subsequent years up through 2005, at least one of us has performed in the variety show, but generally we just bring the whole family in and sing and dance and make fools of ourselves. And
we also think a lot of Jay Pace.
Yes, and he was the musical director for the variety show, and just a great, inspiring guy. Roseanne Schauf.
Who wrote Ashland?
Yeah.
Or no, not the town. I'm sorry. She wrote the history book.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. She's a colorful character. We like Ian, who runs the caboose, the wine shop up the street. That's become kind of a gathering place. Every Friday night they have wine tastings there, and so you get to reconnect with the community and see old friends when you go up there.
What do you enjoy about living in Ashland?
I enjoy being able to walk everywhere. I like going down to Cross Brothers to pick up milk, bread. I walk with my friends almost every day, about 4 miles. My dogs love it. We love it, especially when it snows, because it's just so pretty looking down the railroad tracks at all the Victorian houses, and there's ice on the trees, and it's so quiet, except when the train comes through.
Yeah, it's beautiful during every season, and then there's a lot of history here, and there's a great sense of community. And unlike some of the subdivisions that we've lived in the past, there's people who've lived here for their families have lived here for 150 years, and so we've gotten to experience what it is to live in a community that has a lot of history to it and a lot of character.
And what makes Ashland so special?
I think that community that we've been talking about does. I think it's because you have the people like us who've only been here 14 years, and then you have people who have been here for literally 150 years. Well, not anybody actually that old, but their families have been here. So you just feel really connected with the town because you know so much about it. Unlike a subdivision that sprung up 5 years ago that has no history, the people don't know each other. You just have all of that.
All the great characteristics of a small town. People take care of each other. I remember during the Hurricane Fran, I guess, is when power went out. People would come over. We had a generator, and so people would come over and we'd serve them coffee. And I wired a couple of generators for friends and neighbors, and you have that sense of community that you don't have everywhere else. Now, that said, it's a small town, and so everybody knows your business, and that can be a good thing or not such a good thing depending upon what your kids have done recently. So.